My name is, right now, is Edward Haven. I have had two other last names. The original family name was Reconnecting in Poland. Then in hiding, my name became Luniewski.
And so, Dad, how old were you when the war broke out?
I was within a month of 6 years of age. I was born in 1933, October. The war started, as everyone knows, September, when Hitler invaded Poland.
And who were you living with?
At the time, I was living with my mother, and my father had been drafted into the Polish army, so he was gone. I was with my mother and my grandparents. My grandfather owned a building where we lived, and that's where we were before the bombings of Warsaw started. Before the bombing started, somehow, and I don't know how, my mother and my grandparents became aware that something like that is coming, and so they tried to escape. My grandparents had a chauffeur and cars and things like that to Russia to get out of Poland. And we got as far as a farmhouse somewhere in Russia, and how they knew who the people were or how they got in, I don't really know. But we were in the farmhouse, and one thing that stays in my memory, certain things do, and one of them was that at that place my mother almost choked on a bone, which was very visible to me. But to make the long story a little shorter, we had to turn back for whatever reason. Politics, I guess, between Russia and the Germans caused us to go back. So when we got back into Warsaw, the building we had been living in was destroyed, totally leveled. My grandparents had a country home about 25-minute drive outside of Warsaw, a place called Konstancin. That's where we went. And we lived there quite a while, safely. It was in the middle of a forest. It was a beautiful area. And I felt, in my memory, felt very safe. I didn't, I wasn't that aware of the persecution. Anyway, we lived there for a good 2 years. And then the Germans ordered every Jew to report to the ghetto. So we had to leave that house in Konstancin and went into Warsaw, into the ghetto. And that I remember as a very, very traumatic place, because there were people I saw that were dead or dying on the streets, and there were animals that were dead. And I do remember being hungry there. Very difficult to get food. And we weren't there, my mother and I weren't there very long. And what I have learned since then is that she must have had some jewelry that she had taken with her, because my father was wealthy also. And she bribed one of the guards, and I don't know whether it was a German or a Polish guard, but they had both, guarding the gates around the ghetto. And so she and I escaped to the, what you call, Polish side, which is the Gentile side of Warsaw. And we moved in to what I know now, because I've gone back and seen it, to one of the apartments that my grandfather owned in Warsaw. And there were people there that had worked for him, so they knew the family, and they didn't report us. I've learned since then that there were many that did report the Jews. And so we lived there, and whenever my mother and I would go out for any reason, if she was somehow going out to get some food or something like that, a lady who I believe now was my nanny would walk me on one side of the street and my mother on the other side of the street, because, and I always hate saying this, but I was a blonde kid, and the Germans went by looks a lot. And my mother looked more Jewish than I did. So she would walk on the opposite side of the street behind where this nanny, who I now know was nanny, I don't remember the exact person. And it was during one of those walks that my mother, I guess, was taken. I never saw her again. And at that time I was approximately 8 and a half, I think. So this lady, and I've learned since then, placed me with, and I don't remember if it was her that walked or not, but I was placed with the nanny and her son. And I lived there with them for approximately 2.5, almost 3 years. And that was also a very safe time for me. And I played with her son and played a lot of chess. That's where I learned to play chess. And so that lasted for about maybe 2.5 years. And one day we were out, her son and myself, in Warsaw. And as I say it, all hell broke loose. The uprising started. This was around August of 1944 that I've learned, obviously, since then. And so we started running. I ran in a different direction than they did. So I was separated from them, never saw them again, and I wound up with an underground basement of a building with some underground fighters. And I met another boy. Again, this was very traumatic because it was scary. I mean, you never knew where the Germans were versus where you were. My mother got false papers, and that's where the name Luniewski, while we were living in this apartment, she somehow acquired false papers for her, Bronislava Luniewski and Edward Luniewski. This was for protection. Now, whether those papers were identified as false when she was taken, I don't know, because I never was involved in that.
So, after the uprising, when you're going forward there, so do you have papers now? I mean, at that point, you said
no.
After 44, when the uprising happened, do you still have papers?
No.
You're just an 8.
Well, let me put it this way. I really don't remember having papers.
Right.
But when the uprising started, I became a scout for the underground. At that time, I was 11. And they armed us with the boys and the girls, too. As they sent certain ones, they armed us with hand grenades. And they sent us out to look for where the Germans were, or where maybe other underground units were. And it was during one of those times, and this, of course, sticks in my memory, that this other boy and I, who we became friends, were out doing that, and we ran into a German machine gun nest. And all I can tell you is I threw the hand grenade, I ran like hell. I have no idea whether I got anybody, but I got shot in the leg. It was a kind of a grazing blow. So I was down, and this boy helped me out, and I was able to continue back to where the underground units, one of the units was. So that was quite an experience, and that lasted about, now I know, that lasted about 60 days or so, 2 months. So when it was over, and it was rough because there was a lot of hunger. No food available. I mean, we ate raw potatoes and things like that wherever we could get them and find them. So it was very, very bad. But when it was over, we were rounded up by the Germans because they defeated the underground. And of course, as history knows, I don't know if any of you read the history, the Russians were across the Vistula River, and they did not come to help the underground leaders because they wanted them to be killed so that communism could be established in Poland. I've learned all this since then. The Ghetto uprising I know nothing about because that happened before I was at the time with my mother, and I don't know anything about it.
Because you weren't in the ghetto.
No, she had already taken me out and we escaped before the uprising of the ghetto.
And can I ask you just
Sure.
to go back? Tell me what happened to your grandparents.
Okay, after my mother and I escaped from the ghetto, okay, I have no idea what happened to them. I can only guess that they were taken to Treblinka.
Yeah, that's where most of them.
Most of the Jews out of the ghetto, that's where they were taken.
And we've looked for them when we were in
I've looked for them, I've looked for my mother. I can't find anything. I mean, kind of an interesting thing that I did find, put in my, for ancestry, I put in my name, my grandfather's and grandmother's name, and my father. And I found out, and I didn't know this, that they had brought my father back in 1920 from Poland through France to the United States, and he attended the University of Pennsylvania. And he graduated. As a smart man, he knew, you know, like 3, 4 different languages. So I found that out. He never told me. I mean, that's another story. So that was kind of interesting to find. And they went back, and he graduated, and I guess went back to Poland. But to get back to this roundup that the Germans of the uprising, they took us to a camp, civilians, a lot of them, called, I can't remember the name. It was a camp just on the outskirts of Warsaw, where they put us. And at that point in time, then they were letting people go because the Normandy had already happened. The Russians were already in Poland. So the Germans were kind of being squeezed. And so they would let you go if you had a place to go on a train. They put you on a train. Well, these 2 ladies pretended that they were one of my mother and one the mother of the boy that I was with, the kid. And I can't even remember his name. Anyway, we were on this train, and I guess the lady that pretended to be my mother knew someone in this little community outside of Krakow. That's where the train was headed. Now, whether it was headed toward Auschwitz, I have no idea. But she somehow arranged or talked to someone for a priest at the station there to take me to this Catholic family in a place called Bieżanów, which is outside of Krakow. And so I don't know what happened to the boy because he didn't come with me. I was taken to this Catholic family, and there were the parents, he was a baker there, and had a son and a daughter. Anyway, the son was later on killed. He drowned trying to save some people. He was like in the merchant marine type thing. So the daughter basically took care of me. Now this was about the age of 11. And it was a farm, and all these folks have seen it, been there. And so I took the cows out to pasture. That was one of my duties. Then at the end of the day, and I'm an accountant, at the end of the day, we counted the money. So I learned how to count money with the baker's family. And I was there. It was a very peaceful time, although they hid me because they pretended that I was a member of the family, some distant cousin or something like that, because there were still some Germans around, even although about a year later that was the end of it because the Russians came through there, and I remember the fighting. It was in the middle of the winter, and they basically got the Germans. So anyway, I lived, like I say, I lived there, and it was a very pleasant life, very peaceful, and et cetera, until, a good thing happened. One day a lady came. I knew her from before. And I then learned that she came to identify me. Because my father, and this is another side, had been imprisoned in Romania with a bunch of other officers, and he escaped, and through the Middle East, he got himself to New York, United States. He had another sister who had left Belgium before the war. She was in LA. So he somehow got in touch with her, and her husband was a jeweler, and so he kind of set up my dad as a jeweler. Anyway, my father started looking for my mother and myself from the United States. And I've got letters, copies, since he died here, of all this, that it was it must have been awful for him. And he couldn't find me, and they finally looked through the Red Cross, and somehow they traced me to this family, this Catholic family, and he knew this lady, or he had her name, and he told them, or who told her, whatever, to come and make sure that it was me. And so she arrived. He went through his own hell.
And we have had all these letters interpreted.
But he also, you know, he never found out anything what happened about my mother. And of course, once I was identified and I wrote him and all that, I couldn't tell him. So at the age of 13, I left Poland, left the Bieżanów, and came to the United States. And I flew, well, first I went to Paris, where he had friends that I stayed with till I got the proper visas and passports and all that good stuff. And then I flew from Paris to Stockholm, all by myself, from Stockholm to New York, where he had another friend coming in from London, or from England, and he and I came out on a train to Los Angeles. And that's the first time at LA's train station that I saw my father after roughly 7 years.
So did you remember your 6-year-old name?
Well, you mean at the time?
I mean, at the time, did you know that you had gone through name changes?
Well, I knew my name was Luniewski because that was very important. And I'll tell you something here that you can cut out or not, but in order to hide, my mother tried to have my circumcision reversed by a doctor. Well, it didn't work, and so I was told, then you never take your pants down. So I did know about that, and at the time, I don't remember whether I knew the Rechtschaffen name or not. I probably did, because I was old enough to know that. But I went on the name of Luniewski. And
so the person who came to the farm, that was someone that you must have, who knew you when you were...
Knew me and knew my family, had maybe worked for my family. I don't know.
Okay, could you do a sentence that says the lady who came to the farm? Just in case it comes out later, the lady who came to the farm was someone who may have known him.
Yeah, she was, the lady that came to the farm was a friend of the family, or possibly worked for my family. And I know that I recognized her immediately when she came to see me. So anyway, that's pretty much the story of that, and I came here. And of course, my father, I didn't speak a word of English, so I had a tutor for 6 months that he hired. And by then he was fairly established. He had even made enough money. He bought a building in Hollywood, an apartment building, and that's where we stayed when I first got here. And, you know, it was very peaceful, very quiet, and I remember he used to take me to the hitching post in Hollywood and watch all the Western movies. I know all the actors and all that good stuff, you know, and it was very pleasant. And he met a lady, and I guess they fell in love. She had 2 daughters. And so he married her. And so I was raised in that home. She was a Jewish lady, but not very involved, you know, in the religion. As a matter of fact, we had Christmas every Christmas. Oh, yeah.
Moved you into assimilation right away and never talked about
No,
being
well,
Jewish.
that's one of the biggest things, and my wife will tell you, the kids will tell you, that I regret is, number one, not knowing anything about my mother and her family. I was just too young, and he wouldn't talk about it because he remarried, and so he wanted to keep that kind of stuff away from his new wife. And I was young and in that way kind of stupid. I didn't ask him. I just became an American and, you know, lived like all the rest of the kids. I got a little bit teased in junior high school and high school about being Jewish, which was kind of difficult because I went to one of the finest college prep schools in the country, which was Harvard Military School in LA, San Fernando Valley. And I was teased, and so I didn't want to fight because I didn't want to get kicked out of school. I think I was one of 2 Jewish kids in the whole school. It was a private school. Anyway, it was a military school, so I had to wear a uniform and all that good stuff. And I played sports. I played football and some basketball. So and I made it through as far as acquiring the knowledge. You know, I didn't get great big A's and B's, but I made it through. And I graduated, and then I went to USC for a couple years, and then I went into the Army. And it was while I was in the Army that I met this wonderful woman. We were a blind date, set up by friends, one of her classmates and one of my classmates, and they were dating, so they set us up for a date, and that was over 55 years ago. We've been married 55 years. And no, I was about to mention that.
I can't believe that. Anyway, go ahead.
We've raised four great children, and you know, I don't want to say which ones are. No, but I won't.
You could tell
No.
me your favorite.
Two favorites here.
No,
I mean,
two-
I would say
No, they were all great.
absolute favorite.
They were all great. They had some
Right, I'm
moments,
second to that.
you know. They had moments, certain ones.
Okay, just a minute, so
Yes,
now,
4 wonderful children, and Carrie, Patty, Dan, our son, and Christina, which was the last one. And we have, what do we have, 5 grandchildren. I forgot to count. Our oldest daughter has 2. I'm sorry, 3. And Patty has 2. And they're wonderful grandchildren, and we love to see them. This is always a lot of fun.
Should he talk about the fact that he married my mom, who was Catholic,
Yeah.
raised us Protestant, and then in our, you know, in high school, then told us we were Jewish?
Yeah.
You want that?
that's good.
Well, even before that, Judy's mother found out that I was Jewish. And of course, I didn't admit it right away, even to Judy. I mean, that's how I was hiding.
You were still
And when her mother found out, she basically told Judy, you can't date him any longer, or you can't go out with him. And so I used to have to pick her up at her friend's house so that we could go to a party or whatever it was. And that's how it worked. And then, you know, I asked her, you know, to marry me, and we had to elope because of her mother. And her brother and sisters, they weren't so prejudiced as much as they were trying to keep Judy at home with her mother to take care of her. Okay? So they had a big meeting with us and big talk. Of course, it didn't work because we did elope with 2 friends of a friend of mine and his wife. They were married, and they stood up for us. We still see them out down in the desert. So that was the beginning of it. We went on our honeymoon. We were married in an Episcopal church in the San Fernando Valley, because the Catholic Church wouldn't marry us. And so we went to Las Vegas and, you know, on our honeymoon, etc.
So I have a question for you, Dad.
Yeah.
So raising the kids Protestant, how did you feel about raising us that way? Did you just want to forget about being Jewish?
I had no qualms about it whatsoever, because, to be honest with you, I really didn't have any big deal about being Jewish. All I knew is you can't let anybody know. And I brought that with me, you know. Now, I don't give a damn, pardon my language, who knows and what they know. I don't care. And that's been for years.
At a certain point, you decided to tell the children. Let's hear
Yes, she made me do it, and she was absolutely, my wife made me do it, and it was absolutely correct, because she made me realize, and she was right, that we didn't want them to find out from somebody outside. So we did tell them, and I think somebody said, am I going to be am I different?
What does that make me?
What does that make me?
Same person you are.
And I was like, yeah. All my friends were Jewish. I'm like,
Right, right.
So when did you start trying to go back into your history? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the first time, I mean, other than talking with the family and all that, I did a Shoah testimony for Spielberg video.
Wait, Dad. No, don't you remember that when Russia broke up and they opened up the records and you went through not the Smithsonian, but Simon Wiesenthal. And you started to
Oh, yeah.
research. That was before the show.
So
Oh, yeah, yeah.
tell us before you started, maybe start talking in that complete
Because
sentence.
that's before we went back to Poland for the first time.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, I was one of the hidden children presentation at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. As a matter of fact, we went with some friends, and we stood in front of this exhibit that was there of my life and my picture of myself and my mother, etc. And there were people standing there, and they said, "Oh, that's him." And so.
But talk about the time that when you realized the records opened up from when the Eastern Bloc broke up, and you wrote to the Simon Wiesenthal Center and found out who was still alive.
That's how you found Yasha.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
there.
yeah, no, right. Well, I wrote because I wanted to see if I could go back to see that family, that Catholic family. And I learned they got in touch with, her name was Yasha, the daughter. She was at the time 19 when I was there. And they found her, and she wrote back to me that they would love to see me, and it happened, just so happened that she and her husband, she married by then, they're both scientists. She was a chemist, and he was some other kind of scientist.
he was a nuclear physicist.
A nuclear physicist. And by the way, let me just stop right there. There was a priest in Krakow that used to, and I know nothing about, used to come over to the house in Bieżanów in the Catholic family. And he turned out to be the Pope, Pope John. So he knew my story.
Well, let's go back. Let's go back now, because you were a little quiet in there. Let's tell that story again.
Well, there used to be a priest from Krakow that used to come over to the house, the Catholic family's house, in Bieżanów, and whatever, to visit the parents of the girl that took care of me, the lady. And I was just a priest. I had no idea until later, when I became in touch with Yasha, the daughter of the baker, that they knew him and they were friends of his. As a matter of fact, her husband, I believe, was the one that was involved with him in some school or something like that. Anyway, he became the Pope, Pope John. So that was quite a thing for me to learn. And of course, since then we got in touch with her, And she wrote back, and they were coming to Berkeley, California, the college, for some sort of a seminar. Well, at the time, Patty was living there and going to, you were working then, right? Yeah.
Graduate school or whatever, yeah.
Whatever, yeah. And so we stayed with her when we came up and met with them. They were, I mean, it was amazing. And they, even their daughter from New York had come out. So we met her too, Barbara. And so we had a wonderful reunion.
And that was wonderful because it was the first time my dad had seen anyone from that life. And Yasha
Yeah.
walked in, and she's this big Polish woman, and she looks at my dad and she's, Edek, you're so fat. And she'd been eating so much, Edek, like that. It was so funny. And my dad was like, it was so, I'll never forget it.
It was very, very
Thank you.
emotional
Very
because
emotional.
it had been since 1946. And so,
When was the Berkeley reunion?
I don't remember exactly
You're
when,
still alive, so
but it
it's
was
86.
86, so it's a long time.
Can you,
I had this vivid picture in my head, and I still do, that when my father and I guess my mother would drive, my father had a convertible Duesenberg a car, and when we would drive there, we came to this corner, and right there was the house, and that's embedded in there because it was such a great place. Anyway, that's how I found the house when we went back. And so they took us, you know, throughout in Warsaw and various places. And we, as a matter of fact, went to Mass this was on a Sunday. And I'm sitting there, and the priest happened to be speaking very slowly in Polish. And I started to pick up certain things. Judy will vouch for that. And it was amazing because I hadn't spoken the language for many years. I lost the language. I can't speak it. I can't. I don't think I could understand it now, unless, huh?
Yachikohan.
Yachekohan. Well, that they all know. I love you. Dzień dobry. I know that too. So good morning.
What about the lady that came out of the building?
Yeah.
Oh yes. So while we're with them, we're visiting one of the apartment buildings that we found, because I had the addresses from my father. You know, he passed away by then. He died in 1956. He was 56 years old. Anyway, so we had the address, and we're in front of one of these buildings, apartment building, and out comes this elderly lady. And so they asked her, do you know the Rechtschaffen family? And she almost fainted. She took the one look at me, and I looked like my father, I guess. She thought it was him. And then we went into it. We got into it with her, and she told us, like, she knew, and I don't exactly know where it is, but she knew approximately where my mother was taken. And Judy thought that we had been there. And she knew all about the family. And there were other apartment buildings and things like that. So we talked to her outside for, I don't know how long, but...
And remember, Dad, what she said? She said that for the Polish people, this was unusual, she said, your grandparents were good landlords.
They were good landlords, and my grandfather owned a leather factory in Warsaw, and so he employed a lot of people. And I think she might have, worked there. But she knew all about the family.
So here's a little harder question. How did you feel when you heard about your family like this?
Very emotional, but still, as I recall, still kind of missing the facts about my mother. That has always been very difficult for me.
She didn't know much about your mother.
Well, she knew, I didn't ask her specifics about her, where she came from or any of that, but she did know that she was taken on one of the streets while walking. So somehow she knew that. I don't remember hearing about how she knew it, but she did know. So that was part of something that I had already known, but that she confirmed for me.
She gave her life up.
My mother, of course.
Were you?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, she's my angel watching over me. Yeah.
gosh, she
I've-
must have been a very resourceful.
She was.
She got you out of the ghetto.
Yeah.
She got the priest. She got the.
No, she didn't get the priest.
Oh no, the other person.
That was later. That was later. No. But she did definitely get me and protected me out of the ghetto, and basically she saved my life. So, you know, that's. But I know nothing about where she came from. I know nothing about her family, which is difficult.
We have
you
a
know.
beautiful picture of my dad and his mom that we took.
There's been a couple of pictures. One when I was just a baby,
And the one
where she at the country home where she's holding me, and then there's a later picture that was taken somehow during the time that after we had escaped from the ghetto, and she was hiding. We were hiding. There was a picture of her and I that my dad somehow had. I don't know how, but anyway, he did have it. So, other than that,
So do you tell this story very often? Have you?
whenever I do, I've spoken to children at my granddaughter's class, and I've spoken to some children in Palm Desert, Palm Springs area where we live. So I've done that,
You've been interviewed a lot.
Yeah.
and I've been interviewed. I have articles,
You're having people write,
papers.
like Corey is writing.
Well, yeah, I had original article back in 1947 in Los Angeles Times, interview that this person did with me and my father. And then there's been some other articles in the desert that I have, and so.
I'd like to know, when you speak to classes of children, what questions do children ask you?
Well, varied questions, and you know, I try to give them a little bit of history about how the whole thing happened and why, etc. And so they ask me about, for instance, one child wanted to see my wound on my leg, but they ask me good questions. They ask me, you know, how did you eat, or what did you have to eat? There's stuff like that. So I try to answer as best as I can remember.
Just various questions. How did you feel? What were you frightened?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
bombs. How did that affect you?
Well, there was so much fighting going on, and bombs and grenades and machine guns and things. And I'm here about 3-4 years ago. I started to develop a hearing problem. I went to a hearing aid, and they told me basically that's what caused it. All that.
I have a question for you. How did you feel when I got married with the chuppah and the Jewish wedding and all that? A, and B, how'd you feel at Jack's bris? When
I
you
felt
found-
very good both times. I felt good for you, you know.
Can you back up and say, when you and Steve got married?
Okay. When you and Steve got married, it was a very, very comforting thing because I had a long talk with Steve, which he initiated, and we talked about, you know, I knew that, obviously I knew he was raised Jewish and he was Jewish, and so I was somewhat pleased about that she was marrying someone in that faith. And he seemed to me to be, at the time, to be a very responsible individual who would make her happy and secure, and I felt that was good. And so they've been happy and they've been good. They've raised our 2 grandchildren. So we've been back, and we come back to see them all the time, and it's really
And
nice.
what about Jack's bris? Remember that?
Jack's what?
Bris, when
His
you were the
bris.
one to hold him, the circumcision.
Oh, yeah, I do remember him. I was holding him when he was circumcised, so that was
So
very,
let's back up. I remember when Patty's son Jack had his bris.
okay. I do remember when Patty's son was being circumcised. I held him while the process was started, and it was a very emotional thing for me. and obviously for everybody else that was there. So I do remember that, and I was glad. I was happy at that time.
Did you make the connection between when your mom tried to recircumcise you and then?
Oh yeah, oh no question about that. But I mean, it was a very different very different circumstances, because I was at the time, 9 years old, something like that. So you know that was difficult. It was very painful, and but she tried to save me. I feel that it's important to tell the story, whatever my story is, so that people can realize what the Holocaust was all about and how certain people survived. Not many, but certain people survived. And to be honest, it was all hell. And that's, other than that peaceful time that I had with my mother and that Catholic family, it was very, very dangerous and scary, and I saw people getting killed. I even saw some Germans being shot. So that part of it is hard, and but I want, you know, when you read the news and you read about certain people saying, "Oh, it never happened," which I think everybody's read or seen, I just can't believe that someone would be that stupid not to realize that history happened. But that's
So what
it.
do you want these kids to take away? What do you want them to do with the information you're giving them?
I want the kids to realize and to understand and to remember and pass it on to friends and their own families when they have them, etc.